And now it's time to welcome our guest for today. It is a very special guest. He actually got in touch after last year's festival. He contacted me. He told me that he's a huge film buff. So I always enjoy talking to people who follow the channel. And this guy is a filmmaker and a film critic. So Port Film Co-op, welcome to the show.
G'day, Frody. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you on. So, could you tell us something about what your background is with regards to film?
Sure. I've done filmmaking. I've worked at festivals, more in a art film area, more pretentious kind of area. And it's in recent years that I think I've gone back to my roots and rediscovered things like Rocky IV, which I think is like pure cinema, whereas beforehand I was sort of more into European art films and bleakness and things like that. And although I still love those things, I've started to ponder what is good for not just in terms of right-wing politics, but what is good for our people, what is good for Western nations to consume. And I don't think dark films are the best thing. I think that we need to return to archetypal heroes. And Rocky IV is one of the best examples of that because it's such a stripped down movie. So my background is more highfalutin, more pretentious, film festival kind of thing. But I've really returned to populist cinema as my sort of favorite thing. And I actually think there's a lot of experimentation, avant-garde, and just being contemporary. Like a film like Rocky IV is so hyper edited for its time. It's very contemporary. It's sort of using MTV video aesthetics, which are it's kind of like avant-garde cinema, packaged as a mainstream movie that was the highest grossing film in America in 1985. So I love it when mainstream cinema and the avant-garde intersect and give us just something that's visually astounding. And I think Rocky IV is a good example.
It is an interesting film, and I'm glad you picked it because it is. I mean, we talked about a lot of 80s classics and films that defined that 80s aesthetics on this channel. Lately, we've talked about a bunch of them, Manhunter, films like that, and Scarface and others. And this is definitely one of them. It has a bunch of montages. We're going to get into the details later. It has the music. It has the visual aspects. It is a Cold War film. This is a film that I saw a bunch of times in the 90s when I was much younger. I haven't seen it for about 20 years. I haven't seen it in 20 years. And when I watched it now, of course, I notice a bunch of other details that I didn't notice back then. I mean, I remember it basically as seeing it as a kid. I haven't watched it again as an adult until now. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about it. And I agree, it has some interesting elements, and it is really, I mean, if you talk about textbook story arcs, right? This is it.
Yes.
This is pretty much a textbook, perfect story arc for an exciting story that basically goes back to the ancient world and Aristotle.
Absolutely. I mean, in many ways, it's similar to a Hong Kong kung fu film. It's about honoring your master. See, Apollo Creed, who gets killed early in the film, is his master. If you watch the previous film, he helped him defeat someone else. And so what he's doing in this film is honoring his master, which is as old an idea of a story as it can get, and is universal, and all great civilizations will have stories like this. And that's why it resonates, because it's very classical.
It is, yeah, exactly. It's archetypal. It's almost as if it's built into our DNA to recognize these stories. It's sort of, it goes back to, what's his name, Campbell, people like that who've written about the sort of the elements of a perfect story. And this has basically all of it. It's fantastic. So let's just take it away. Let's start with some of the elements you wanted to bring up about this film.
Well, obviously the editing. It's a film that 30% of the film is montage, which is very high. So that's montage to music, either fighting or training to fight or reminiscing about the past. And it's able to use montage to manipulate our emotions and be evocative, like early in the film when he's decided to fight Ivan Drago, the Russian who's killed his master. He goes for a drive in the car. Now, it's not a simple drive in the car. It's a drive in the car with a close-up of Stallone's face, which he always thought was his most powerful asset, was his face. And if you look closely in the film, there's very particular lighting on his face. There's more than one light, and there's a certain fill light for the eyes. So his face is often glowing and seen as lighting a work of art like a statue. And that's what these guys are. These guys are Greek gods in cinema. This is how old this is. But the editing of that scene, which is simply a drive at night in a black sports car, intercuts with memories of his friend dying, of him becoming a champion the first time, his wife, his marriage, his children being born, the subsequent people he's beaten, all to this music. And it's this great, it's like a film clip, like a complete film clip. It goes for the entire song, 3.5 minutes, of him just pondering all of these things. His wife doesn't want him to go to Russia to fight Ivan Drago, but he must do it. And so he's pondering these things to a sort of power ballad. As the lights flicker on his face, as it rapidly edits between these different points in time, just like how we think. So it was kind of trying to be like how we think when we're emotional. We're all over the place. We're about contemporary times. We're about our formation. We're about pivotal moments in our life, and that sequence, which is a really great complex sequence, ties it all together. So what I would like to say is, for a film that is made in the Cold War, it's using Soviet montage. It's using Eisenstein montage techniques just as much as it's using the slow motion adoration of godlike bodies like Leni Riefenstahl. So it's equal mix Soviet montage and Leni Riefenstahl. In that it's like the ultimate populist propaganda film, and it's so it uses editing, like it's intertextual, for instance. So when he first goes home in the film, after this crazy opening where it's using all these different kinds of film styles, his son greets him whilst filming his dad through a camcorder, which would have been new technology at the time. He's filming him, so you see through the lens. And then not shortly after that, when you hear about Drago, you hear about him by them showing the front covers of magazines. So it's all this kind of different intertextual mixed modes to kind of build this swelling story.
Right. Definitely. And it's sort of like the classic theme of our life flashing before our eyes when we have to do something difficult, or when we believe that we're going to die or something like that. And it's also a summary of the previous film, so it reminds the audience of what they've seen so far. It's sort of like in the classic TV series intro, where you see just a summary of what this happened in the previous episode. So it's a bit of that, and it's the montage, it's the life flashing before our eyes. It's really sort of building the tension, and this film, it's really trimmed all the fat away. It's like, I think it's exactly an hour and 30 minutes, and it's trimmed all the fat away. It's really sort of, it's perfectly populist, just like you say. And, watching it now, I can't think of another film that is more montage heavy that I can think of. What do you think? Is this like the big montage film? Did they do montages in Hollywood films in the 70s, or did it start in the 80s with films like this?
Well, there was a resurgence, but my theory is that montage and sort of rapid editing keeps coming back to cinema to revive it. So, I mean, it first appeared in the silent era with the Russians, and then it reappeared in the French New Wave, and that influenced early Hollywood stuff like Easy Rider, is lots of crazy editing. And then I believe it came in the 80s, but also with a more refined look and aesthetic and use of synthesizer music. But yeah, it is the ultimate kind of training montage film, except maybe some Hong Kong kung fu films where someone is training something like a Drunken Master or something like that. So it actually shares a lot with Hong Kong cinema as well as the German and Russian propaganda films. Yeah.
And I think it's something that we, as a Western audience or as a mainstream audience watching Hollywood films, we associated with action films, Commando, these kinds of action films from the 80s, especially with some 80s type music, with training, with everything. It's Stallone films, Schwarzenegger films, those kinds of films. And I think it's sort of just like you said in the beginning, comparing these kinds of populist films with more pretentious underground films. Sometimes we underestimate how well made these mainstream populist action films actually are, because this is an extremely well made film. Just like I said, it hits every point on the classic story arc, and it trims away all the fat. It has all the things perfectly in place. So I think they're somewhat underestimated.
Yeah. Like I was saying, it's that perfect intersection between a highly populist commercial film with the avant-garde, and that's what's so enjoyable about it. And I do think that we can be film snobs, particularly when we're not confident. We're afraid to admit liking a popular, simple film sometimes. I know in the film scene it can be like that. And that's why I like that Morgoth, I think he chose the first the first Rambo film, First Blood. And that was a really good episode. And he was just being very unpretentious and honest about what his favorite film or one of his favorite films were. And we need more of that. And what does the world need? Does it need more torture porn? Does it need more melancholy? I believe that the 80s and films like Rocky IV or Bloodsport, they represent a return to order. So we had the 60s and 70s, which were countercultural. It was about basically doing the opposite of every little piece of wisdom we've accrued for thousands of years. And the 80s was, although very commercial, hyper commercial, it was about a return to order. So the synthesizer is about a return to something that's harmonic rather than the twanging of a guitar. And the same goes for the visuals. I mentioned MTV, but there's also a strong influence from advertising. Advertising was using a lot of film noir techniques, but sort of in color. And so there's a lot thrown into this film. Like when you were saying it's so archetypal, it's one of the most archetypal films. It literally bombards you with symbolism again and again and again and again through editing. Like it'll have him, like one of the great aspects of the film is when he goes over to Russia to train for a fight that's on Christmas Day. He trains in a humble style in a log cabin in the snow compared to the kind of like hyper technological Ivan Drago, who has a team of scientists around him. It's so humble and primal. And there's these wonderful kind of beautiful sections which are like propaganda where someone has fallen in the snow with their carriage with the horse, and Rocky on his jog stops and helps him. You know, it's like a good deed. And I swear, like it really makes me emotional seeing that. I know what it's doing. It's very simple what it's doing, but it's making him a very honorable, self-sacrificing character. He's going over there to fight this fight. He's not being paid for it. This guy's obviously even out of his weight division, and he's doing this jogging in the snow, and he's just chopping wood and throwing blocks of ice and logs. And then it's edited with Ivan Drago, so it's like cross-cutting between this parallel action. The crescendo is really that mountaintop when he climbs that mountaintop. That's really like the peak of the film. It's massive, and it shows Ivan Drago on a running machine, whereas Rocky's actually climbing a real mountain. and it's that authenticity. So it's a piece of propaganda. This film is a propaganda film. It's in the Cold War, but I would say it's a humanist film. It has a very humanist ending. It's not antagonistic towards the Russians, but it's also very much in touch with the common man, it's quite pure in that storytelling. Even has sort of Christ-like imagery. It shows him praying before the fight. Also shows him carrying this log on his shoulders in the snow, and he falls like Christ walking with the cross. So this film is intense because of its editing. That the film probably could have been 2 hours, but they've crushed it down to 90 minutes, as you say.
Yeah, they trimmed away all the fat, and I like that you said many things that are worth addressing there. I like especially that you brought up this propaganda aspect, because sometimes we underestimate the talent behind propaganda. It's sort of underappreciated in a way. I like watching these films that are obvious propaganda films just for the craft behind it all, and it's interesting how it changes with time. Black Pill made a stream a few days ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. He brought up a film. It was an old Batman film from the 40s where and this was during the Second World War. And it was obvious. It was like obvious war propaganda against the Japanese. They called them the shifty-eyed Japanese, owning a shop somewhere, and they're sort of suspicious people. And watching it now, many years later, many decades later, we think that's sort of crude. But I think that the talent in propaganda is that, well, it usually looks crude afterwards, but the talent is making propaganda that works now, that actually has the right impact on the audience watching it now. And inevitably, I think afterwards is going to look a bit crude. It's going to look out of place. It's going to look that's too ham-fisted. That's too in your face. And that's how many of us think of Hollywood films. But the proof is in the pudding. It works, right? Yeah. And this is exactly this is in the Cold War, and he talks about the need for change, that I can change and you can change, like the Soviet Union can change, that is, give up its sort of position in the Cold War. It's so obvious, it's so in your face, but I think it's extremely well done and effective at the same time.
Well, the film has the perfect placement of being released shortly before the Soviet Union fell. No doubt the film was made in cooperation with the American government. I think, when you're in a war, even the Cold War, I think that's just the way it is. But at the same time, I think that there's like an olive branch, or that there is. I do think it's a humanist film, and there's plenty of films from the 80s that were very antagonistic towards the Russians. I don't get that from this. I think that this goes deeper than that. Although there's this big thing surrounding the film, which is the Cold War and going to Russia and the Soviet Union, I think that it's and you could say that it is pro-American, and certainly not anti-American, but I think it goes deeper to just the common man, honor. Your friend has died, honoring him, and which is the core of any functional society. So it's people will always criticize this film for being jingoistic and purely propaganda. It is propaganda. Yeah. It's a great example of it, but there is more to it than that. As lean as it is, it's a very personal story. I think this is like a Frank Capra film. This is the thing. Although it's got those elements of those propaganda films, its heart is a Frank Capra film.
And I think it is as a piece of propaganda, it's more skillfully made than what we get today. And I don't mean that just because of nostalgia, or we think that everything is just downhill and things always get worse. But I think we've seen it in, for example, one thing that we talked about on this channel is that the interest for the Academy Awards, the Oscars, and Hollywood generally has gone down. Those films aren't seen as very interesting anymore, and they don't have the same wide popular impact as they did in the 80s. So I think that even from just the point of view of a craft, of a piece of art, really, this is better done than the propaganda they make today.
Yeah, the
More
dicing
effective.
and the dicing and slicing of imagery is fantastic. There's some amazing dissolves of just like a punch over a punch over a punch over a punch, and then punching each other, and they're just kind of freeze frames, and another image dissolves in. I mean, it's highly technical, for its time. This is like a pre-digital era edited film, so they push things pretty advanced. And this is directed by Stallone, and we should maybe talk about that. And I wonder how much of that was his choice. It would have to have been, because things were shot obviously to be edited a certain way as part of a kind of swirling sequence. So it's got to give credit to the director here, Stallone, to have a vision for a film to be so montage heavy and so strong with its imagery of physicality and nationalism, and the sequences in the snow, and obviously it's all the training. It's very interesting that he is the director of all people to do that, because we just think of him as a meathead. Like these guys, we don't give them any
an
credit.
action hero.
When they've actually directed advanced films like this. This is an advanced example of film form. And we just think of him as a meathead, but he's actually directed like half a dozen films, and I think this is a great film. So it's very interesting that he, of all people, makes this film.
And there's especially one montage scene that sort of reminded me of anime films with heroes fighting, and that is in the final fight, when you see Ivan Drago's wife in the audience, and then you see the boxing sequences still sort of floating across the screen, superimposed like on top of, I don't know what you call it, but that's sort of typical anime fight hero sequences, right?
Yeah, because when I watch anime, and I don't watch a lot, I just watch a lot of the just the real classics. It really shows that you have complete control. Filming is way more difficult, getting things how you want them to look, but you can literally draw what you like. And you've talked about Blade Runner recently. You see a lot of some of the zenith of these aesthetically strong populist films, like Blade Runner, Alien, and aspects of films like this in anime, because anime absorbs a lot of Hollywood. And it gives it a kind of twist. Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing you brought up earlier is the idea of the populist film versus the pretentious film, and I do think that this goes through a few stages. First, the first stage is probably that some people might want to come across as more intellectual than they are, and so they want to talk about and sound as if they like these pretentious artsy films, right? But they don't really, and they sort of, it's more a matter of them wanting to name drop,
Yeah.
But then the next stage is that you've seen all the Hollywood films, it's the same, and it gets boring. So it's exciting to actually see something new, right? So I think there is, at that stage, there's sort of a genuine interest in the more underground or artsy films, because at least there's some element of surprise there, because you don't know exactly what to expect. Most Hollywood films it's just the same film over and over again with the same but different actors and different characters, right? But it's pretty much the same thing. Whereas in other films, you get some sort of element of surprise. But then I think after that, you can sort of reach a more relaxed stage where you appreciate art films for what they are, for the skill and sort of groundbreaking, the sort of pioneering element in them, but also go back to enjoying classics and more populist films for the actual entertainment and just relaxed entertainment in them, because it's sort of like ridiculous when people think that a writer like Stephen King or someone else has no talent, when they're some of the most when some of the most sort of best-selling writers in history. So I mean, it takes different kinds of talent to create something that is populist, reaches the masses, and something that just reaches the intellectuals. And I think that I think the sweet spot is sort of the intersection between those things. And you get things like Twin Peaks, for example, which obviously has very populist. It's like the classic soap opera on TV, but with some artistic elements. And I think that is when you hit the magic.
Yeah, I would say some films that contemporaries of what we're talking about in regards to Rocky IV would be Top Gun and Bloodsport. I would say, okay, right now, like, we know Hollywood sucks and it doesn't make these kinds of films. Hollywood has gone in a very different direction, and I would say that if you love cinema, you almost need to check out and leave the mainstream right now, and just make sure you've seen all the classics, and maybe see some of those mainstream films that you kind of dismissed. I remember certainly when I was young and becoming a film buff and hanging out with film student friends and things like that, that we wouldn't talk about Rocky IV. We wouldn't talk about those kinds of things. I think we did sincerely enjoy watching art films, but that was also because we were young. And we like bleakness because you're naturally kind of morose when you're, a teenager or early 20s. And I just actually found that art films are just as cliched as populist films. And now, because of their sort of, they are a form of propaganda as well. They're just different. They're propaganda for something else. They're so cliched and sort of unwatchable that I would rather go back and watch all the early Steven Seagal films and go, wait a minute, these films are really well made. These are just really strong films. And then you find out Seagal himself actually had a large hand in the scripts and the kinds of projects that were chosen. And you realize, like, people like Stallone and Seagal are kind of like meta auteurs. Now, Stallone, both of them have directed films. But because they're big stars, they don't even need to direct a film to have influence over it. With their star power, they can change the script. So something like Stallone in the first Rambo film, Rambo's meant to die. Rambo's meant to have killed 5 cops in that film. He had the kind of savvy to live at the end, not kill as many cops, actually not kill any cops, that they'll die accidentally, because he kind of had a vision that this character could be redeemed and didn't need to die at the end. And so these guys are sort of, I call them meta auteurs, because they're particularly Stallone. I mean, they brought cinema back to about the physical body. So they took it back to classical art. That's really where the archetype lies. All the narrative around it is important too, but it was simply about men conquering and men being strong and men having families and all those things. We need this now because our birth rates are low. Like, we're not functioning as a society. And then you just look at, well, what are we consuming? We're consuming rubbish. So anyone that has Netflix is missing the point. It's time to discover the classics, and you don't have to go that far in the past. Even the 90s and the 2000s has some good entertainment, but also there are some new things, I think, being made, not so much on YouTube now that YouTube is cracking down on creators, but there is a small scene that's making memes, shorts, videos, streams that you can kind of delve into. So it's nice to be to enjoy something contemporary, but unfortunately you're just not going to find it in cinema. So you need to find streamers and things like your program. That's what a healthy diet is now, I think, is getting out of the mainstream in terms of what's happening now, but enjoying classical stuff from the past.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think I mean, not to stay too long on the point, but I think that's a lot of it's the same thing with film makers and writers and any creative person, really. I think that a lot of creative people, a lot of writers, they like to write for other writers, right? And the same thing with people who like, who are too pretentious in a way. They just want to make films that appeal to other filmmakers because look at what I can do. But I think that the underestimated talent and what we really would need as a sort of a right-wing avant-garde is the talent and the skills to create things that appeal to the sort of semi-uninterested masses that are not interested in film and not interested in literature per se. Populist entertainment, and that takes talent. I mean, it's to just repeat it again, that you just because it's easy to like and it's easy to watch, people think it's easy to make, and you don't need talent to make it. But that's not true. That also takes maybe a different kind of talent, but it's definitely impressive. People who can produce these perfect things that just appeal to you on a sort of instinctual level because they've pinpointed those instincts in you.
Well, yeah, like Stallone's body, for example, like getting into the amazing, immaculate shape. Like he turned his body into a work of art for films like this and Rambo 2. Absolutely. And there's something to be said for those people in the left-wing art cliques. The fact that they can't enjoy a film like this shows how much they've lost the common touch and they're out of touch with the average person. Because when you talk to people about Rocky IV, everyone loves it. It's a very popular film. It's the highest grossing Rocky film. People voted with their wallets. People wanted to see this again and again, and they just happened to want to see a really intensely edited, avant-garde montage film. So it's great. Like, that's great for art. That's great that this wasn't beyond the palate of the common person. This is a positive story, and you look at things like Top Gun. I mean, Tony Scott, who made Top Gun, he was fired from that film 3 times, all for aesthetic choices that were not commercial, but they were commercial. They just didn't know it yet. It's crazy that these hyper commercial films were made by people with these, astounding, ambitious, visions. And that they were taking from classical art. I think Tony Scott takes a lot from the paintings of Turner and using atmosphere and like smoke and things like that, like his brother. I mean, the days of dismissing, even something like Die Hard. Die Hard is a symphony. The way that it's shot and edited is like a graceful symphony. The way we pirouette through this building, this is high art. And I think that the right wing is a little too obsessed with bleakness, horror films, and overtly political stuff, and not just entertainment stuff that if an 8-year-old watches it, they learn something about archetypes, or they have something reinforced that's binary. That it has moral clarity. So I think. That's why you can't kill these films. That's why they're constantly available on DVD because people want to watch them.
Another theme that I've talked about a lot on this channel is the mysterious transition from the 80s ethos to the 90s ethos, sort of like from the the sort of will to life and like Guns N' Roses to and sort of enthusiasm and that kind of rock to the depressing Nirvana and grunge and that kind of stuff. And that is also in films. I think this is a perfect example of the vitality in the 80s ethos. I love the one of the great characters in Rocky IV is Duke. Is it Duke? His old trainer, right? Who gives these speeches, and I love those speeches. These short sort of pep talks, but sort of if they would have been done today or a bit later, 10, 15 years later, they wouldn't have had the same energy. It's like the films made in the late 90s. It's like this sort of the irony and the nihilism crept in there. And whereas in the 80s, you still have sort of uncontaminated enthusiasm and sort of
sincerity.
Sincerity, exactly. Yeah, and that's why the pep talks actually work in this film, because they're sincere. They're not apologetic and hiding behind irony bros, right?
Yeah, this is Rocky is a very sincere character. He wouldn't even necessarily know what irony is, and that's what makes him, like a wonderful character. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is, and it's. I think it is. It is sad that people probably watching it now. I mean, even I, on some level, because I'm so immersed in today's today's culture, but we live in the world we live in, right? And we're sort of infected by it as well. And even I think that's a bit cheesy. But that's a sad state of affairs, that we think that these sincere moments are a bit cheesy because we're so used to seeing nihilism in films.
Yeah, but you can unlearn that, and that's what I would say I've done over a course of years. Is I've unlearned the ironic response and enjoying things for their ironic value. I used to do that a lot, and I think that's an adolescent thing to do, and I've moved past it. And I've always said that irony is easy because you can just say it's meant to be bad. But sincerity is the hard thing, because that's when you can fall on your face. That's when you're taking a real risk. And so I can watch a lot of entertainment that people would consider is poor quality because of how simple and sincere it is. But I enjoy it because that's what I believe a lot of storytelling should be and needs to be for any successful group of people. Like, it can't always be cerebral, dark, gloomy things. I mean, what is that going to do for the masses? And so in a way, if you care about people, you care about storytelling. And now, like, cinema and Netflix and things like that have a monopoly on storytelling, which used to be around the campfire, but now we watch it, from a kind of flickering screen. It's important that we don't allow people to have a monopoly on storytelling who are degrading our society. So I think the first thing you got to do to enjoy cinema is get rid of the irony response of everything and be able to enjoy something. Even I saw Rocky IV first when I was 10, and I remember standing up and going, "Go Rocky, go Rocky!" And I remember my dad watching it with his arms crossed, going, "They're not even in the same weight division. It doesn't even make any sense." But I didn't care. As a kid, it was such a powerful film, and it remains powerful after maybe 10 years immersed in art cinema, to return to it and to not only find that it's as good as I remembered, but now that I have a more of an appreciation for the craft of cinema, to look at the actual craft and vision for the film, it's wonderful to return to. I mean, what was it like for you? You didn't see it for how long? 10 or 20 years?
20 years probably. Yeah. No, I loved it. And I was looking at it with. So when I saw it first, in the 90s, when I was a kiddo, then of course I saw it with spontaneous eyes. I just got the emotions that the filmmakers wanted me to get, and I got the experience. But now I saw it, I got the experience, of course, but I also saw just the talent behind, just how well and how perfect it was made. So yeah, I did get that the feelings. But I saw it at also on a sort of a meta level, the intention behind the film as well. That's sort of what because I am impressed. I mean, I read everything from the left to the right, and I am impressed by talent and craftsmanship, right? No matter what it is, and I was just super impressed by the craftsmanship that's gone into making this film.
I think they needed to make this a high concept film because it was the fourth film in the series, like a sequel so deep into the series. I think they needed to do something quite different, and so it's pretty amazing that a film can be so popular and it's Rocky IV. Like it's not Rocky II.
Yeah,
it's pretty.
It's unusual. Yeah. Yeah, no, and speaking about the irony and the irony versus sincerity, this is something that I've been saying for years. People have a lot of people have brought up the fact that the right wing movement has made a lot of progress since in the last 20 years, and it has. I mean, we reach 100 times more people now. So we have made some progress in terms of reaching people, but we've also lost something, because what I knew back in the 90s or late 90s when I got involved was the sincerity. People thought that this was a life and death matter. It was like a religious cause. Whereas
Yeah.
now a lot of the people hiding behind anonymity, and I've said this 100 times before, I don't complain about anonymity per se, but it is when people create that persona that they wouldn't be in real life, when they create this sarcastic, ironic persona, then it becomes degenerative. And I think that we've lost some of that just sincere belief.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of the forum culture and the meme culture, it has a place, it has a function, but it can't replace the real thing that's underneath, because if it does that, then it just becomes a part of the same bullshit nihilism that is the rest of the modern world. And that's why I hate the sort of the negativity and the complaining and the just sarcasm, the snarkiness and everything. Because if you're not able to put your heart on the line and put your head on the chopping block for what you believe in, then something is lost.
Yeah, might be a good segue to actually talk about memes, because I actually think that there's a lot of irony in memes. There's a lot of shit posting, and it's a joke. But there are some memes that are short videos that I believe are sort of moving into an area that is like post-ironic and are actually very sincere. Some of them are Hyperborean. Some of them are using sort of Ryan Gosling, because Ryan Gosling is like the Bressonian face that we can project our feelings onto. He's like a blank canvas because of his very, very internalized acting style. So I've seen some really interesting memes that are, there's one where he's holding a monkey, right? And there's this synth, very melancholic synth track playing. And then behind him is like a rapidly edited shots of Europe that are painted, like Europe, or a reimagined Europe with woolly mammoths and things like that. And so what it's doing is it's using the return to monkey meme, which on the surface is like a funny joke. Like, we have failed as a people, we need to return to the ways of being a monkey. But really what that means is we have hit the end of culture, and we need to, we have failed, and we just need to regain wisdom. And so behind Ryan Gosling in this meme, which is just a 50-second meme, are all these shots of Europe and people working hard and surviving in the snow. And so I think that we do need to start talking about memes in a serious way, almost in an academic way, because we cannot trust the universities to do this. They're not going to touch right-wing meme culture with any seriousness. So we need to start talking about some of the green shoots of growth, of actual sincere art that's of all places coming out of meme culture, which is supposed to be ironic, but is actually showing some signs of life as being seriously artistic. So it's very interesting time. Like I believe that in 10 years, a lot of this will be talked about. But right now, because we're living it, we just take for granted that memes exist and they're kind of throwaway. But there is interesting things happening right now in our culture, and they should be talked about more. And we should be rejecting Netflix, and people have. People have started rejecting Netflix, and they'll watch those people on Omegle. But all those people on Omegle are getting raided by the FBI. So it's like these are the people that are pushing boundaries, and in time, people will study those people on Omegle, like the Gypsy Crusader and Cami and TJ. They will be looking at those in a serious academic way, because they are influential on the culture and they are being artistic. They're using like green screens and costume and music, and then in chat roulette, which is a medium where they're chatting to strangers randomly on the internet, are confronting them with all kinds of, I guess, shocking racism and shocking other things. But this is art. It's crude, but it's art, and it needs to be talked about. This stuff is more ironic, but there is stuff happening. But my main point was that there is sincere art coming through meme culture, which is, it's a positive thing.
Exactly, and I'm not against memes or the meme culture or the online culture at all. I'm not saying that at all. I just think that there's something lost if it stops there, and and then we're already dead in the sort of nihilistic hell that we're in. If it stops at the trivial, right? And I think that for too many people, it stops at the trivial, and that is, I mean, if there's anything I want to do with my projects and with what I do, is I want to try to sort of force people almost to move beyond the trivial and go into some deeper levels of understanding of things, rather than just because the trivial is reactionary in a way. And if we stop there, then we've already lost. If we're only reactionary and just memeing about everything that's gone wrong, yeah, that's the first step. That's an important step. But all I'm saying is we can't let it stop there. We can't let it stop at the trivial.
In a funny way, it doesn't need it needs to start memeing into solutions, and it does do that to an extent. But it then needs to become other art forms. It needs to become books. It needs to become all these things, and to an extent, it does. It's sort of on the fringe. I would say that we're in a period of sort of rebuilding a separate culture right now, like that's trying to be separate. And it can't be cancelled. It can't be closed down. And so there's always going to be lag. There's always going to be time delay on these projects coming about. I'm involved in some things that are, trying to do this, and they take time. They take 1, 2, or 3 years sometimes, to make a feature film or to make a book. And they can't just be like right wing. Like they can't just be. Sometimes they just need to be wholesome. Sometimes they just need to be classical. It doesn't all need to be sort of radically political, but in the modern context, something that is wholesome and traditional is radical. So that's the confusing mess that we're in.
Definitely, yes. Yes. So we've been going for about 50 minutes. I like to keep these conversations around an hour, under an hour. So are there any final thoughts that you want to bring out in Rocky IV before we wrap this up?
Just that it's a great film to revisit. You don't need to have seen any of the prior Rocky films because it's such an editing marvel. It actually has montages that told you everything that happened in his life before this film, all the relevant information in an entertaining, sort of quickly edited way. So it's a film you can go straight to. And it's a real film of the 80s, where I would say the other films are much more films of the 70s. But this one was very much a sort of contemporary film at the time. I would also say to people, don't use streaming services and rediscover physical media. I think that when we don't have physical media, we're losing part of ourself that's human. And that there's great pleasure in having a physical copy of something that's a legitimate copy, where you can share with someone you care about, and you can build a library. I think cinephilia, being a film buff, is a great journey, and it's just like if you like literature, you collect books. Well, if you love cinema, you should really collect films.
Right. I agree definitely. I think a lot is lost when things become too available and just a click away. I think we appreciate things when we own them, for sure. I think this has been a great conversation. So thank you so much for doing this. This has been a great conversation, and I enjoy talking about the popular film. I'm happy about that element of this particular Decameron Film Festival, that we've had a lot of action classics. Predator, Alien, and Rambo, and now Rocky as well. So I really like that about this year's festival.
Thanks for having me on, Frody. It's been really good.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank everyone who's been watching live. Everyone who's been active in the comments, who sent donations. We got some super chats, but I think those super chats were meant for the AMA later tonight, so I'm going to read them then instead. So I just want to go through some links. You can find the schedule on gtkmedia.org/Decameron. You can always send questions, and also questions for the AMA later tonight on entropystream.live/GTK. We have a new morning show, Wake Up on the Right Side. You can follow us on Telegram at Wake Up Right. And of course, the main Telegram channel is Guide to Culture, Guide to Kulchur. And of course, if you want to support the show, the channel depends on your support. You can go to gtkmedia.org/donate. We have a fundraiser going, and you can help us out through Entropy. You can help us out through crypto. I was just going to say thank you so much.